Mumbo Number 5, Gangnam Style, Who Let the Dogs Out. These memorable songs hit a nerve that defined our culture for a brief and sometimes embarrassing period of time, with the creators of these tunes never matching the success that these efforts took them to again.
But what's the cinema equivalent? Well, today and throughout the rest of the series on Cult Movie Cult, we'll be digging into the directors who had a similar career trajectory. Hello and welcome to Cult Movie Cult, where we watch and discuss the horrific, the obscure, and the flat-out strange from the other side of cinema. I'm Mark Dickerson.
And I'm Jeremy Fink, and this is the first in our new series, Flash in the Can, the one-hit wonders of cult cinema.
Good luck, Mary. Stop by and see us the next time you're in.
Thank you, but I'm never coming back.
I don't know about that girl.
How do you mean?
Day before yesterday, she was the only one of three girls to survive an accident. You'd think she'd feel a little something. Maybe in her place, I'd do the same thing. Just pick up life again. But I still say she's behaving strange.
I have no desire for the close company of other people.
My dear, you cannot live in isolation from the human race.
Who's the man in the hall?
Maybe you heard the boards pop or something.
I didn't hear him, Mrs. Thomas. I saw him.
There's nobody there.
He's been following me, that's all there is to it.
That old pavilion out by the lake. Somehow you associate it with all this, don't you?
There was someone else there. That strange man was there.
Hysteria won't solve anything. Now control yourself.
You think I imagined all of it, don't you? You think I'm insane?
I didn't say that. I don't mean that.
That's just what I need. Get mixed up with some girls off a rocker.
I don't want to be left alone!
All right, so before we get into our film today, which is Carnival of Souls from 1962, which I'm very excited to talk about, we just want to kind of check in. We haven't done one of these series in a while. We haven't recorded in a bit since our previous series. So just wanted to check in with you, Jeremy. And I know you actually just got done filming a short film that you raised some money for. How'd that go? You said it went pretty well?
Yeah, so I did a Kickstarter campaign for a short film I wrote called Exposures, about a paparazzi photographer having a secret backdoor meeting with a reality TV star. And we just shot it this past weekend. It was definitely a pretty big jump for me. I'm coming from doing super micro budget stuff, and we still didn't have an insane budget for this. It wasn't Hollywood level or anything, but it was definitely a bigger project, and it was a really cool learning experience. And it was exciting because I realized how much the films that we've talked about in this series have influenced me as a director.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was really cool just being on set. I'd find myself thinking, oh, this is, a Big Lebowski moment, or this is a Primer moment, or something like that. And
right.
just kind of digging in and thinking back to, we've talked some of those early Peter Jackson films, going all the way back to our first series. So yeah, definitely a good, big learning experience, but happy to be here.
These movies do stick with you, so.
Yeah, they do stick. They're definitely some, they get in your head, and that's why they're cult movies, though, is they persist, they abide, as we say.
They do abide, yes.
They do abide. The films abide. But happy to be back here today and talking about Carnival of Souls.
Yeah, I'm excited to get back into it too. I mean, I've been doing the dad thing for the most part, which has been super crazy and busy in its own right. But, I actually haven't had any time to watch anything, let alone cult films. So I was super excited to get back into this. And when I watched this movie, I just got really excited to talk about it and delve into it again. So I'm excited to be back. And, we always take little breaks in between series, but that was a particularly longer one just because we both had a lot of stuff going on. But, I feel like it's good to get back into it. So we're both happy to be doing that. And let's start it today by talking about Carnival of Souls, which so there was, to go a little behind the scenes here, we had a lot to choose from. When we came up with this series idea, One Hit Wonders, we thought it was such a good idea that we just kept coming up with movie titles. We're like, oh, this and this and this. And we came up with a bunch of movies that did not make the cut. I felt like we had to be a little strict with this one because, it's hard to say sometimes. It's like, a movie could be a hit in a certain sense, but maybe it's a mainstream hit. You know, maybe it's not a cult movie.
Yeah.
Like maybe not purely a cult film. So I tried to go for films that really fit that role and were also successful, and that the director or creator did not go on to do much else. If they did do anything else, nothing that that matched the
It
impact
totally took off.
that this particular film had. So I think the list we came up with is a good one, and I think all of them make sense. So, and I think the other movies we came up with we're probably going to save for future series, like different ideas that we had. So we were able to narrow it down to, I believe, 5 films for this. And the first one, so we wanted to go chronologically again for this one. We just felt it made sense. So Carnival of Souls was 1962. And Jeremy, since you're better at this than I am, do you want to go into a little bit of what the plot is?
Yeah, let's talk plot. So this movie, like a lot of movies we talk about on this podcast, the plot is not the most important feature of the movie. It kind of jumps around a little bit. It's a very immersive film. But to give a rough background, so it starts out in Kansas with a character by the name of Mary Henry riding along in a car as they're drag racing with two other young women and a couple men. And they're speeding across a bridge, and they go flying off. The car plunges into the river. The police are looking for the car for a while, not finding anything. And then eventually they find it, or they don't find the car, rather. Mary surfaces. She just walks up kind of out of the water and can't remember how
hey guys, what's up?
Yeah, like, hey, what's going on? But she can't remember how she survived. They're not seeing any of the other people. Then, as if, not really even that affected by the incident, Mary moves to Salt Lake City, Utah, where she is hired as a church organist, but doesn't seem to be particularly religious. She kind of just views it as a paid gig. And when arriving there, things start to get kind of weird for Mary. She starts seeing this man who pops up out of nowhere, who is actually, I don't know what we're going to call his character. I think we just call him the creepy man for our purposes.
Yeah. Well, I guess the word ghoul comes to mind.
Ghoul, yeah.
Apparently that is a word that is used a lot with this film.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he's like the ghoul.
Let's
or
see
just
if we can
a ghoul.
get some IMDb, see what he's credited as.
Yeah, let's see what he. Yeah.
But he was actually played the ghoul or the creepy man. I'm not even seeing a credit for him. He must have, because he was actually played by the director of this film, Herc Harvey. Yeah, so he's actually credited as the man. So we were right on the money. She starts seeing this man. He starts popping up. Kind of haunting her a little bit. He has these dark eyes and this really pale face, but he'll only show up for a few seconds and then disappear. As I mentioned, he's played by Herc Harvey, the director, who's a really interesting dude who we'll get into in a minute. And then our character Mary discovers this abandoned carnival. She kind of seems drawn to it and keeps exploring. She also has this incident where she's walking around and no one seems to hear her or see her or acknowledge her. So it starts to kind of delve into this state of pure madness and confusion, but not in a way where the movie is confusing somehow, which I guess is a good first talking point. Did you feel lost at any point during this movie, Mark?
I actually did not, because it's such a simple story and premise. It's very ethereal, and it's very hallucinatory, and all these kind of trippy images and things are going on, but the story itself is extremely simple. Basically, well, as you mentioned, the beginning of the film. So the opening, it opens somewhat abruptly, actually.
Very abruptly.
It just really gets right in there.
You go right into like a 2-shot of people driving in the middle of a piece of dialogue.
I was watching it, I thought I missed something. I rewound it twice. I was like, wait, what's going on? But so yeah, it starts off with a good old fashioned drag race, which you see sometimes in movies. You don't really see them too much anymore. But so it starts off with this drag race, and there's the accident. They go in the water, and from there, once she emerges from the water, the main actress, her character's name is Mary. Once she emerges, the rest of the film is her trying to just go about her regular life and sort of deal with what happened, but not really. I mean, the thing that I noticed, I don't know if this was an acting thing or what, but it seems like her character was not really that disturbed by what happened. I mean,
no.
I guess it's because she is trying to push it down so much, but it almost seems like she's very carefree and just kind of doing her thing and getting a job at the church and hanging out with this weird creepy dude who lives across the hall from her, and
Mm-hmm.
she's kind of just having a good old time. So I don't
Yeah.
know if that's like a character thing, like that's supposed to be her suppressing the traumatic event, or if it's just like how they played it. But anyway,
Well, it's interesting, and so this movie, it's and once again, we always recommend you watch the movies ahead of time, because
yeah,
sometimes
because there'd be
talking about
spoilers.
spoilers, but also just talking about a movie is never as good as seeing the movie. You
Yeah,
know,
we always recommend you watch
yeah.
the film before listening to this.
So yeah, so we can enhance your experience of it, but not give you your first experience of it.
Yeah.
But this movie pretty regularly gets talked about in terms of influences on another very famous director, being David Lynch.
You can totally see it too.
You can see it. It's pretty clear that he saw this movie at some point in his formative filmmaking years and just totally devoured it. But what's interesting is, in talking about Mary and how she's kind of going about her life and how all of the other characters exist in this film, I was looking for it this morning, but I couldn't find the exact quote. But there's this really, really great essay that David Foster Wallace wrote about David Lynch in part of his collection in a book called A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again. The essay is called David Lynch Keeps His Head, which I highly, highly recommend for any David Lynch or David Foster Wallace fans.
I should read that.
Yeah, really terrific essay where basically he was allowed on set while they were making Lost Highway. And but I remember this quote always stuck with me, and I wish I could find it. I might try to find it later and we can post it online or something. But he was talking about how what makes the characters of David Lynch films unique is that they're possessed. Not possessed by some type of ghoul or ghost, but they just in their nature seem like there's some outside force acting upon them that causes them not to live totally as human beings do. So they're able to kind of ignore violent situations. They're able to not pick up on things that should be funny, or they're able to laugh at things that shouldn't be funny. It's just this strange sense of possession. And I think that Mary is a perfect example of a character who's possessed. You know, she acts on impulses. She doesn't really, like, she has fear, but the fear seems to happen at weird times. She's able to kind of be really horrified of something happening to her, and then 30 seconds later act as if she's totally fine.
Right.
It's like some kind of outside force is just acting on her being.
Yeah. And the fear does eventually take over, obviously. I mean, we won't talk about the ending just yet, but that does start to manifest itself a lot more as the film progresses. But yeah, for most of the movie, it just kind of struck me as like a I was talking to you about this a little bit. This movie's a bit of an anomaly because it's sort of like a B movie, but it's at the same time it's visually striking. You know, it has artful editing and cinematography, but it's pulpy. You know, it has that almost exploitative feel to it, while still having this classic Hollywood feel as well at the same time. So it's sort of interesting in that regard. And it's kind of all over the place, which I actually kind of dug. Like, I liked how it would kind of dip into these more surreal moments. It almost felt like a Maya Deren movie or something.
Yeah,
like Measures of the Afternoon.
that's a good point of comparison.
Yeah,
for
like
sure.
it would become like a silent experimental type, film. So it had a little bit of everything, I think, and I don't know if that was a conscious thing, on the part of the filmmakers, but it's something that I responded to and I found pretty interesting. But did you get that as well as you watched it? Like you?
Yeah, it kind of bounced around a little bit in terms of tone, but it all felt like part of the same movie, which I think is a real accomplishment, actually. I think that, and I've probably talked about this before, at least in my personal experience making films, that tone is probably the hardest thing to do.
Yeah.
Because especially in even little things, like, you're shooting on one day and there's a certain mood with your actors and what you're doing with the camera, and then you shoot another day and all of a sudden there's a little bit different of a mood because the weather's a little different, or you're tired or you're not tired. So tone is always a really, really challenging thing to do. And I think that this movie, in terms of being a tone poem, is really interesting because it is all about tone. Like this whole movie revolves around a feeling of, like, a certain feeling. It's not like the plot doesn't really matter that much. The honestly, like the characters don't even really matter that much. Like, our main character isn't a particularly unique woman. Like, she's kind of flat. She's basically either scared or she's like just trying to live a very banal, I'm a working class person existence. And a lot of the characters around here are relatively flat. But
And a lot of the dialogue's a little, I would say a little corny, and I mean that's where I got the B movie feel, mostly like the acting and how things are presented. But like you said, Jeremy, it is very difficult to have a tone, a consistent tone, and this movie definitely does have that with everything that is going on. And I think that's really, I think that's what makes it stand out. That and those surreal, dreamlike images that we touched on, I think a lot of those are actually pretty creepy, even by today's standards. Even maybe more so because it is just like, someone in white makeup that's staring at the camera, but that's pretty creepy. If you just kind of cut that into a movie, it can be used very effectively.
Yeah. It called to mind for me almost a little bit in The Exorcist.
Okay.
There's this one moment where the demon, you kind of see the demon for a second, and the demon looks a lot like the man in this movie, and it's kind of like presented in a similar way. Like, I don't know, it's what I love about this movie is you can really see its DNA all over horror cinema. Like, since then, it really...
It's funny you say that because I was just about to mention that apparently George Romero noted that this film was the inspiration for A Night of the Living Dead. Yeah. And when I read that, I was like, oh, totally. Like, I definitely understand that. Like, those, sinister-looking white-faced people walking slowly, it all adds up to, okay, that makes sense that he would make that from this idea.
It's interesting with this movie too, I think, because we talk about these other movies, and this movie over time, to give a little bit of background, it has become a cult hit, for lack of a better term. But when it came out, it wasn't really, like a lot of the cult movies we talk about, it wasn't really viewed as anything big. It kind of, years later, I think in the 1980s, kind of started picking up a festival following. It started getting screened a little bit.
Well, they also sort of re-released it in a way because they found the original negatives and they remastered it in a certain way.
Put out a director's cut that's 4 minutes longer.
Right. So so that put it more in people's consciousness again, I would say. But yeah, after that, it kind of, the Criterion Collection did a release of it. It kind of took off from there, and it became, way after the fact, it became a cult film, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
But deservedly so, because I think it has a lot of memorable aspects to it.
Oh, absolutely.
So far,
yeah. I mean, some of these scenes are truly horrifying. Like this is sometimes, at least in my experience, you'll watch an older horror movie that everyone says, oh, it's so scary, and then you watch it and it kind of feels a little dated and not really actually scary. But some of these scenes, like, I wouldn't want to be sitting alone at night watching some of these scenes.
It feels almost modern in its sensibilities in that way.
Yeah, and an interesting thing, and so since this is a one-hit wonder film, we need to talk about, and I think I think we would like to spend a lot of time on this particular episode talking about, is kind of the director and the production of this film and kind of his career path. I think what's kind of going to kind of be unique about this particular series is that, yes, we are going to talk about the films, we're going to dive into them, but we're also talking about the nature of filmmaking a little bit, because to be a one-hit wonder, that means that something had to line up that never lined up again. So the individuals in this particular series are going to be really valuable for us to discuss. So the director of this film is a guy named Herc Harvey.
Great name.
Great name. Awesome name. I don't think that was his real name. What did you say it was? His real name is like...
it's like... hold on.
Arthur or...
It's
Harold Arnold.
Harold Arnold. Harold Arnold Harvey. Yes.
So our good old friend Herc, he was bouncing around for years and years and years, mostly doing industrial and educational films, which is a really interesting training. I would today kind of think of it almost like a director who spends their time doing a bunch of branded content, and that's how they learn to make movies. But the difference being that then there wasn't really the opportunity like there is now. You couldn't just pick up an iPhone and just go make short films. I don't really think he was doing much work in the way of fictional narrative filmmaking. He was mostly just doing stuff about tractor trailers and he went back to it later. He went back to it later in his career. There's a film. It's like Danger is. Like Shaking Hands with Danger or something. It's all about how to use construction vehicles properly.
Well, the time that he made this film was basically considered a working vacation for him. Yeah. He was like, hey, I'm going to take off work and go make this movie. Oh, okay.
All right. Yeah. Sounds good, Herc.
So he went and did. And I think they shot it in, I don't know if I noted exactly how long it was. I believe it was 3 weeks.
3 weeks, yeah.
A very short amount of time to make a film in, so especially when you're actually using film to shoot it. So yeah.
Yeah. But I think what's interesting though is, and this is something we talked about in our previous series about low budget, lo-fi sci-fi, about low budget science fiction films, is that the materials that they had available, the resources that they had available, and the limitations really influenced how the film was made. So it's really interesting, and one of the things that's always because I saw this movie for the first time maybe 5 years ago, and I've watched it one or twice since then. Is I love the way, because there's a lot of scenes in cars in this movie, and I think this movie, even though it came out in 1962, I would kind of consider this more a 50s movie. I
feels like
it feels like but what feels so different about this movie,
it has that Betty Crocker feel.
Yeah, it has the Betty Crocker feel, the way the characters speak, the types of characters we're seeing on screen. It feels a lot more 50s, but what makes it, for me, feel so fresh and so different than all those other movies is the cinematography. Just such a big part of it, because it's black and white, but it feels like there was just some really punchy, almost like Jean-Luc Godard-esque new wave kind of things going on.
Definitely.
That maybe he was looking at Breathless, and maybe he was looking at Jules and Jim, but realistically, to me, one note I read is that he was used to shooting on I believe Ariflex cameras, and he those were, at the time, they weren't really used as movie cameras. They were used mostly for the instructional videos that he was doing. And educational videos, but what that allowed him to do is, because they couldn't afford rear screen projection, is whenever they were shooting in a car, they would put the camera inside the car. And that's something that today, think about a car scene today where you wouldn't see a handheld camera inside a car, or a mounted camera inside a real moving car. You know what I mean? Like, unless it's done with green screen, but like you think about, even the really famous scene at the beginning of Pulp Fiction, where the Travolta character and the Samuel L. Jackson character, the Royale with cheese scene that is so well known, and that that's the camera getting right up inside of a car that is actually moving, and it just has this rugged kind of on the road fun feel to it, and that's something that Herc Harvey and his cinematographer Maurice Prather were able to accomplish in this film that was years ahead of its time.
Definitely. Yeah, when I say that there are certain modern sensibilities going on, I feel like, even though it feels like it's from the 50s, it also feels more modern than that. Like, almost like I would even go as far as to say like late 70s. Yeah, kind of feel to it.
Like
Especially
Don't Look Now or something.
Yeah, something. That's exactly the movie I was thinking of, to be honest. So yeah, it has that feel. And when I said it was simplistic, I guess because this movie also has a bit of a Twilight Zone feel to me.
Very Twilight Zone.
I actually learned why that is, because apparently it was partly inspired by a Twilight Zone episode called The Hitchhiker. I've seen. Yeah. So that was, like, I guess one of the inspirations of this film. The other inspiration is that when the director Herc Harvey was driving by an abandoned, it's actually called the Saltaire Pavilion, which is essentially like an amusement park. It's in Utah, and he was driving by it, and the image of this abandoned place just struck something in him, and he got the idea for this movie pretty much from that. And then he worked on it with the writer, the one who ended up writing the film. And so that, combined with that Twilight Zone episode, I guess, is how you get Carnival of Souls.
And also, thinking back, it's been a while since I've watched The Twilight Zone, but the very first episode of The Twilight Zone, which I pulled up here, which is called Where Is Everybody, is about a guy who's in an empty town feeling like he's alone and being watched. And there's definitely a little bit of that in it, too.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely a Twilight Zone influence. But definitely not just Twilight Zone.
Yeah, it transcends that because of the way it's shot and the way it's edited. And just like the moments of... yeah, it's like I can only compare it to David Lynch, sort of, where it's like that surreal aspect that I love. Like, whenever movies go in that direction, it's just, that's what I enjoy, and I kind of love that this movie sort of dissolves into, her just going on this strange journey up until the end of the film, which I guess we could talk about the ending parts now a little bit, to go back to talk about the film. Then we'll go back and finish talking about the filmmaker as well, because I do want to talk about those parts, because it basically, because up until that point, which I would say like the last 15, 20 minutes of the movie, it's pretty standard. Like I said, sort of like almost like a B movie exploitation film type feel to it. There are elements and there are scenes that transcend that. Like in particular, the one scene that stuck out to me was the scene in the church when she's playing the organ, and she starts having these flashes of images. With these ghoul-like, humans or creatures, and that scene was really powerful and really cool, I thought. But then, most of the film is mostly dialogue and things like that. So when it kind of gets to that point where the main character is kind of going off on her own and she's becoming more and more disconnected with the people around her and the world that she's in, and that's when it really, for me, I was like, okay, I'm really, really digging this now. Like I enjoyed it before that, but when it gets to that point, I just thought it was really cool that it almost becomes like this surrealistic fever dream, I guess.
Yeah.
Like reminiscent of some of the more, like I said, like the more experimental films from the silent era. Like Maya Deren was like someone who just like really came to mind.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Herc Harvey was inspired by those types of films, or if that's kind of just the direction that the film ended up going.
Yeah.
But I mean, that scene in the ballroom at the end with all the ghouls dancing, I mean, that's just like beautiful stuff right there.
It just kind of totally runs off the rails in the best way. Like not running off the rails like the movie loses control of itself.
No,
like it's like it runs off the rails like you as the viewer lose control of the movie. Like you can no longer.
Yeah, it's like I'm just gonna follow this woman on this journey now.
Like, it's going where it's going, and you can do nothing about it. You're just along for the ride.
There's almost no more dialogue at a certain point either. I think there's a couple lines like at the very end, but all the dialogue goes away. It's just silent, experimental type filmmaking, which I thought was really, really, really cool. I think that's what brings it to like that next level. As a cult film, I feel.
Yeah. Well, and also in terms of its influence, there's just, like I said, there's so many movies, particularly David Lynch movies. Like I think about Mulholland Drive, and kind of a similar thing happens where you're moving along, and then the last half hour, just it turns into this insane fever dream. Right. And so it's one of those things where the fingerprints of this movie just blows my mind every time I watch it. And especially the more movies I watch, then when you come back to this and realize that there are even more movies that have been influenced by it than you think there have. Yeah. It's pretty mind-blowing. It is interesting, though, to jump back, because I think it does do some really interesting, subtle things earlier on in the film.
Well, I think... Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
But I was gonna say one more thing about the filmmakers, because I feel like, I had brought up, did they know what they were doing? And I think to a certain extent, they definitely did, because portions of the movie are actually tinted in a manner similar to silent films. Which is probably why I got that vibe a little bit too. So whenever Mary is in one of her altered mental states, the picture has a faint cyan tint, and then the quote unquote real scenes are in pure black and white, which is something that you don't even really notice when you're watching the film. No, but it's definitely there. And later in the film, the tinted segments also have distorted sound and picture. So they were doing some really cool stuff with the filmmaking itself. But sorry, I didn't want to jump on what you were about to say.
Well, no, building off of that, even like, because it's cool, because so much of what gets talked about with this movie is the big ending scene, which naturally, because it's pure insanity in the best way. But there's also stuff earlier on in the film, like there's a scene where I believe it's the priest character is telling Mary where to find her room, and they're outside, and he just points to his right, and the camera whip pans left, and it just whip pans to black, and then when it lands, we're already just in the room. It's like a really weird transition. There's another one where the priest is just outside watering some flowers, and Mary is just sitting inside the church just staring at something, and the priest just gets this funny look on his face and just goes inside and just starts asking her about what she's staring at. And so there's some like really subtle little weird things going on that you don't really notice are weird, and that's why. And I'm gonna sound like a broken record, but it's kind of like that David Lynch possessed thing, where it's like when you're watching it, you don't really question it. Like it doesn't seem that weird because they create the tone of it. But when you really start to think about like why did he just go into that church? Like what caused him, and why are we just seeing him clipping some flowers? You know what I mean? Like he's just standing around, and we're on that shot for like 5 seconds, and then this priest just pops up, gets like a look on his face like he's heard something. But all that's happening is she's sitting in pure silence, just staring at a wall. Like some very weird things that you don't question while you're moving through it, but then they're really just setting you up to accept. Because a movie like this, I think probably the biggest challenge for a director is getting people to believe it, getting people to lean into it, accept the suspend their disbelief, accept the verisimilitude, and it's just like there's just some super super subtle, and that's why I almost really like the opening of the movie, how it just opens in a hard way like that. And I remember the first time I saw this film was actually in a theater. I saw it at MoMA, and I remember thinking the same thing when that happened. Is like, oh no, they started the movie in the middle. What's happening? But I feel like it's one of those things where it almost that's the perfect setup. Because,
it's like a prelude, yeah.
Well, and it's kind of like it's a movie that spends so much time in a dream state, and it's kind of like going into a dream where you don't really remember how you got there. It doesn't set itself up nicely. You're just all of a sudden in the middle of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also some other stuff you were bringing up there. I think this movie would definitely warrant or would benefit from multiple viewings. Like I actually want to watch it again, like right away, just to see if I can pick up on certain things, because there is a lot, before it totally goes off the rails. Like we said, in a good way. But before that happens, there is a lot of subtlety and a lot of really cool camera movements and I guess camera tricks, some of them you call, the way that things are shot, and the editing is great throughout. And yeah, I mean, the movie as a whole, and it's very short as well, which is to its benefit, I think, because and that also adds to that Twilight Zone feel where it's kind of like you're in and out, you know, you come in, there's a weird situation, and you leave with more questions than you had at the beginning. So it's really cool. And I think anyone who is a David Lynch fan or into like that kind of,
or Jordan Peele for kind of newer.
Or Jordan Peele.
There's definitely, I am willing to put hard cash on it that Jordan Peele is a fan of this movie.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. But just like if you're interested in the subconscious at all, I think you should really check out this film. And, like we said, it's also kind of creepy in parts. It's a little scary.
Oh, it's definitely scary.
And I'm not someone who gets scared from watching movies, but it's there's some general creepiness going on. Like I actually made the sound like like a couple times, like man. Like when something would pop up.
Well, it's also it's nice too because now we see so many horror films because at this time horror kind of meant something different. Like there wasn't as much of this kind of psychological and like possessive ghosty horror going on. A lot of the horror films up to this point, it's focused a lot more on alien horror, monster horror. Like it was kind of more of like a clear and present danger. And this is kind of one of the earlier films to
psychological.
Yeah, psychological, maybe a little bit what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like supernatural a little bit. And so it's one of those things where the way they deal with scares, like we're used to seeing movies about ghosts now all the time, and they still rely very heavily on I don't want to say jump scares, but they do a lot of jump scares, but it's also kind of like trying to make you feel uneasy by jolting you. And this movie doesn't really do that because they'll put, like, for example, there's a great scene when we see one of the times when we see the man. And which is kind of like the last time before we really dive into madness that things kind of make sense, is she's sitting in this therapist's office who is a very weird character. She meets this therapist, and so she just happens to meet a therapist when she's having...
I'm a doctor, follow me.
Yeah, like she's having a breakdown and his office just happens to be right there, which just adds to how surreal it is. Like it's like things just line up. Like he might not even be a doctor, but it just... Exactly. But in that moment, something possesses him to pretend to be a doctor. But there's this great moment where she's just sitting there expressing all of her horrified feelings to this dude, and you see that his chair is turned around the other way, and you know that it's not him sitting in the chair.
Yeah,
like but they just let you sit there for like a minute and a half, and you're just waiting for this jump scare, like this huge jump scare, and then he just turns around slowly, and you're just sitting there, and then you cut away from it.
Well, these people, like, or these ghouls, whatever they are, they just stare into your soul. Like, some of these shots, they just, I love that they just linger on these people's faces.
Yeah. It Follows. Have you seen It Follows, Mark?
I have seen It Follows, yeah.
That definitely,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can see influences all over the place. Like, I feel like this is a very influential cult film. But I was going to say about, like, the scene that I brought up before where she's playing the organ in the church and having these visions, and actually cuts to the ballroom scene, which we see later. Yeah. But it has the ballroom scene, and one of the ghouls he leaves the ballroom and comes towards the camera,
Mm-hmm.
and then he comes very close to the viewer and puts his arms out, and the next shot is these hands grabbing the main actress's hands as she's playing the organ. So, and something like that is like just really jarring and really cool.
Yeah.
It's just like it's something that you could go for just like a cheap jump scare, but the fact that they build up to it like that and they kind of linger on this person and it still has that impact. I mean, that's really something there.
Yeah, it's interesting because that was a moment I noted as well. That kind of I noted in the same vein as that whip pan we were talking about before. And kind of thinking about it now, I think one of the things that makes this movie work is that you never really feel a cut the whole movie. It seems like the movie just kind of flows together, like not like a single take, but it's like the cuts are kind of hidden.
Not in a bad way.
Yeah, the cuts are kind of hidden, so it feels like you're just moving from place to place without ever really landing anywhere.
Right, you're like, oh, I'm in this location now. Yeah.
Yeah, like the scenes just kind of bounce together, and I don't know, it has this very strange effect of being lost, and that's why it is so dreamlike. And it feels like be it Herc Harvey or the editor or the cinematographer or all of them, or the actress, her name being Candice Hilgos, who she's so good in this movie. I don't know how she didn't do
Never
a lot
really
more.
Went on to anything else.
Yeah,
well,
she
apparently
was also.
Her agent refused to represent her after this film came out. After seeing this film,
she was also a one-hit wonder, I guess. But yeah, I think that's like whoever was making this movie was really thinking about the nature of dreams. More so than a lot of other movies that are dreamlike, for lack of a better term.
It feels more dreamlike than a lot of films that try to do that.
Yeah. It's just all kind of like one just flowy, pulsating, weird just spot just to be lost in for 80 minutes, and then you kind of wake up at the end.
Yeah, that's how it feels. And to kind of wrap up our discussion on it, as you touched on, Jeremy, the film, when it came out when it was released to theaters in 1962, it was a failure. So it was, did not do well at the box office. But then it began airing on late night television, and as we mentioned, there was a re-release later on. And this is the type of thing that would make it very well regarded and make it a cult classic, I would say. And it's a film that not only anyone should check out, but any filmmaker, anyone interested in film in any way, I think you can get a lot from this movie.
Yep.
And there was a remake as well, which I learned after I watched this because it popped up on the screen. It's from 1988, and there was some involvement from Wes Craven. I believe he was a producer on it. I just skipped through it just because more out of morbid curiosity than anything. Wasn't really expecting anything. Especially after I just watched this film, I'm like, there's no way they're going to match what they just did. So it seems like they go for more of like a Jacob's Ladder type thing, where there's like these grotesque creatures and monsters showing up in the characters' hallucinations. But the actual plot of the film is completely different. There's only slight homages to the original, to the point where it doesn't even feel like a remake. It's kind of like they took the title and some of the main elements. So suffice it to say, it's not nearly the classic the original is, but if you want to see Larry Miller dressed as a clown, this remake has you covered. One interesting aspect of this, though, I did want to mention. So Sidney Berger, the actor from Carnival of Souls, who plays John, who is I guess the love interest in this film, although he's kind of just comes off as like a creep to me.
Yeah.
But anyway,
it's complicated.
It's a complicated relationship.
Yeah.
So he's in this film, the film we're talking about from 1962, and he is in the remake from 1988, and those are the only two movies he's ever acted in.
Carnival of Souls, that's really interesting.
So he just has a cameo role as a police officer.
Well, apparently
at the end,
they asked Candice Hilgos, the lead from Carnival of Souls, to be in the remake, and she turned it down.
She was not into this remake.
She was not into the idea.
I was reading a quote from her where she was just, talking about how dissatisfied she was with it.
Yeah. Apparently, also, there's another, an unofficial remake that came out in 2008 under the title Yella, directed by Christian Petzold, who... Mark, have you ever seen any Christian Petzold movies?
No, I don't believe so.
So I believe he's a German director. He did this movie a few years ago called Phoenix, which is honestly probably one of my top 20 favorite movies of all time. Really, really good. So I'm curious. I'm definitely going to go in and watch this movie now. Because his aesthetic is just totally wacky and mind-bending.
I think this is the kind of idea you can take and you can use it in different ways.
And if we have any filmmakers listening, this is a public domain film. So
It is a public domain film.
take the ideas and bend them in all the ways you would like, because it's out there and it's for you.
So it's easy to find, and take the ideas and make your own thing.
Show your friends and let us know what you think.
I think the important thing, like you said, Jeremy, is the tone. You just want to keep that consistent tone, and try to do something cool with it. And I think that's what this film does. And Herc Harvey, just to wrap it up on him. So when he shot this film, it was a very small crew, only consisted of 5 other people besides himself. So this had to be somewhat of a labor of love for him. He took some time away from work, and he made this movie pretty quickly. And when he finished the film, I guess because it wasn't a success, he went back to his original job of making industrial and training films. And he traveled to South America, I guess, to do that. And so he received his royalty checks, and the check bounced, apparently. and the distribution company folded in 1964. And that was pretty much the end of his film career, although he did continue to make these industrial training films for the rest of his life. And he's actually quite proud of these films, and is somewhat annoyed that he's only known for his one feature film, Carnival of Souls, which is a little mind-boggling to me. Yeah. But I guess he's very proud of his training films, and that's good for him.
They're pretty. I started watching one, the one I mentioned earlier, called Shaking Hands with Danger.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I watched it. It's definitely not your stereotypical training film. I'll give him that.
There's some artful shots and editing in that.
Yeah, there's a nice little bird's eye view angle from on top of a tractor, looking down at a guy who's about to get hurt by the tractor. And it's pretty. I don't know. It's pretty. I could actually see why he might want more people to know about those. But alas, this is the film that we will all remember, and we will all cherish this film. So
I mean, it would have been great if he did get another chance to make more of these types of films, because I would have loved to really dive into his filmography after seeing this one. But because this is the series, One Hit Wonders. This is all he made. Yeah. So that's it for Herc Harvey. And as we mentioned, Candice Hilligos, not sure. The main actress from this film, anyway. She didn't go on to do too much either. She was in one other horror film, I believe, pretty soon after this. Actually, not until 1971. It's called South of Hell Mountain. I'm assuming it's a horror film. Actually, I have no idea what it's about. But that was it for her as well. So, lots of kind of one-offs here, and look at what they made. So you never know where a cult film's going to come from or what kind of impact it's going to have. But before we go here, Jeremy, did you have any last concluding thoughts on Carnival of Souls?
Yeah, final thoughts. Definitely, like we said, this is a public domain film, so it's really easy to find. It's on YouTube. I watched this movie more than once if you get the chance. Just try to absorb it. It's a really kind of unique, one-of-a-kind piece of work that is important. It's important to talk about, because directors like Herc Harvey, if we don't kick their names around, even though he only had this one film, they can get forgotten. So it's important. It's important to just keep this kind of film and films like it in the zeitgeist, and let people know. If you like this movie, tell people about it, share it.
Yeah, it's a great singular film that warrants watching it over and over again, and is very influential. So definitely a cult film, and one that I'm glad I got to see for the first time, because I had not seen this film before. So that's going to wrap it up for today. I want to thank you for listening to Cult Movie Cult. You can find us on iTunes, Podbean, and Spotify, as well as on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. If you have any cult films you'd like to hear us discuss on the show, or if you'd like to officially join the cult and be a guest on the show, please feel free to reach out to us at cultmoviecult@gmail.com. This has been Cult Movie Cult, and until next time, so long from the other side.